this is all the shit you have to worry about if you're going to use. And oh, by the way, the story, the mythical legend of gear that you think it's just going to take you to the top, maybe it will, it probably won't. No matter what, if you lean on it as a crutch, this is the type of shit you got to look out for. So if you guys don't want a whole generation of young people jumping onto gear use, hopefully we're on the same team. Guys, you know the drill. If you got big dreams and bad genes, you are in the right place. These shirts are available at barbellapparel.com. I want to talk about something that's heartbreaking today and actually really important. It's related to the discussion of risk versus reward, of PED use, of what it takes to be the best, philosophical questions like, do you actually have to risk blowing yourself up to be the best? Over the last 10, 15 years, powerlifting has seen this big resurgence. We had the big Lily Bridge Milanichev face off. We had a bunch of like crazy numbers being set in lower weight classes. And a big part of that was Cailer Woolam, who was competitive up until pre-COVID about 5 years ago. And it doesn't look like he's necessarily out of his prime performance-wise, but he's had some hang-ups in the form of some injuries. Now, Cailer stood out because he was just a fantastic deadlifter. He would compete in the 220s and I think sometimes the 198s, and he would just put up stupid numbers. And you look at his build, like the guy is obviously built very well to deadlift, but even aside from his leverages, you notice that he's very thinly built. He has kind of thin arms. He doesn't look like he has a really big barrel chest. He doesn't look like he has an exceptionally thick back or the really thick, powerful hips you generally associate with elite deadlifts. And it's no secret, a big reason for his ability to pull big weights is his build. He can exploit the shit out of sumo, and he applies that to a whippy deadlift bar, and the result is fantastic. Now, if you're ever curious as to how substantial the advantage is, I want you to think about where the start of a sumo pull is. Look at how open the knees are, and then look at how open the hips are, how upright you are. That's going to tell you how much torque is on your lower back, not nearly as much. That's going to tell you how strong those joints are going to be in those most optimized ranges of motion, and it is what it is. I'm not here to like shit on sumo. The bottom line is, the way Michael Phelps was built to swim, Cailer Woolam was built to fucking deadlift, and that's why he was getting in like the mid-high nines and like the 220s, putting up stupid numbers. Now, unfortunately, he suffered a run of injuries that have sidelined it. So recently I was wondering what happened to Cailer Woolam. He was part of this freak surge of deadlifters that were all taking like the top spots in the all-time deadlift numbers while competing in like the 220s, the 242s. And this video popped up the other day, and it was showing him dumbbell pressing, and he was happy that he was hitting this dumbbell mark, which was 5 sets of 8 reps using 100-pound dumbbells. Now, I'd always said one of the most impressive things about Cailer to me wasn't necessarily his deadlift, because I know how potentially strong you can be if your hips and knees are positioned in that way. Like if you simulate that in a rack pull setup, you get very good at it. The potential to optimize is really, really good. Just few people have that specific type of ratio. Sounds like I'm hating. It's fucking physics. I always thought his bench was incredibly impressive because he got right around. In fact, he might have hit a 500-pound bench in contest or a 490 using these long knuckle dragging fucking monkey arms. And I thought that was impressive. You notice he doesn't have a big barrel chest. He has thin arms. So as I'm cycling through, I see that he's talking about recovering from an injury he got a few years back, and that this is the best he's been able to do. You cut over and we see his pec. Now, this is a terrible tear. The problem with tears is that tendons can be reattached. Of course, there's a lot of problems with fucking tears, but tendons can be reattached. But if you tear the muscle, you can't reattach it. You can't go in and sew it up. I've heard it described as trying to sew together a hamburger. I had a very good friend of mine, Philip Morris, who I've featured on this channel, who is a freak. He was in the mid-6s, legit as a bench presser, built like an IFBB pro bodybuilder. He could have been a highly, highly competitive individual. He shredded his pecs on a routine set of bench press, or one side, went in to get it operated on, and they sent him back. They stitched him up, said, we can't do anything. It's not the tendon, it's the muscle. And you see here that the tendon looks to be completely attached. It looks like the muscle pulled away. So he still has functionality, but with something this severe, it's always going to be less strong. It's always going to be reduced output compared to what it potentially could have been, obviously compared to the other side. Now, this was so substantial. He said he did this 3 years ago, and this is a PR for him, an incline bench press for sets of 8 with 100-pound dumbbells. That is a massive drop in physical output. This is a guy that's obviously been consistently training, and even says here that flat bench and decline is out of the picture because of the way he tore his pec. Now, in addition to that, in 2021, he also suffered a quad tear that he says his knee still isn't quite right from, and he shows this video of him going down with the 605 squat and the bruising, and then a year later he posts his anniversary pic, and then to this day it looks like he's squatting, it looks like his strength is coming back, but he says his knee isn't quite right. Now, if we roll over to open powerlifting, we see his records, an incredibly impressive fucking record. I mean, 242s and 220s. He had some runs at the 198s. I mean, an 880 deadlift at 198, like Jesus. And it looks like his best competition pull on this website anyways was a 953. A couple goes at 970. And look, the guy's ranked number 8 all time with a 953 deadlift in the 242s. You got a 21-21 total. Again, in the 242s, he got a big run in the 220s. He was a monster lifter. There's no way around it. But you can see that obviously his deadlift was propped up by his sumo setup. His bench never quite eclipsed 500 pounds, and his squat never broke into the 7s. In fact, some of his runs, he had over a 300-pound disparity between his best squat and his best deadlift. Looks like he's closed that gap a little recently, but this is back in 2019. He got a 677 compared to his 953 deadlift. But in 2018, I don't know if there's injuries or tweaks that play into these numbers, but he had a 600 squat compared to a 948 deadlift. So that tells you how much the setup, the physical advantages are playing in. That's not to say he's not a strong person. Now, I'm not showing this to point out the disparity of a sumo setup versus other numbers. There's obviously guys that do very well sumo that are very strong overall. So you could say, yeah, his leverages are very good, but he probably spammed that more so than other lifts. I know my overhead got good because I have good leverages, and I fucking love doing overhead, so I did it over and over and over and over. That could be a factor. There's a lot of different things at play. He could have had knee or hip issues throughout his career that prevented him from squatting. There's a lot of potential things. But I do think there is something worth pointing out if we're looking at this as a single case study where you have somebody that is very advantaged in one lift, which means they're going to be exceptionally disadvantaged in another. If you look at his limb proportions, you look at how long his legs, he's got these spider legs, these long arms, that just means the guy's putting out a lot more effort and getting into a much more precarious position when he's at the bottom of something like a bench press or a squat. Here he looks very comfortable, like Pete Rubish, similar setup. Knees are almost completely open, but he's still pretty upright at the start. I mean, it's an impressive setup, and there's a lot of horsepower still required to get it going. But if you look at the bottom of a squat, it looks a bit more awkward. Those long legs need somewhere to go. So his knees are tracking a bit forward, but his hips are still tracking way back. And I imagine that this is probably a lift that took him a while to get very comfortable with. Now, you can't look at the way somebody lifts and predict exactly how they're going to get injured, but hindsight's 2020, we're fucking Monday quarterbacking here. Is it surprising that somebody who had such a disproportionate leverage advantage to one thing, who excelled at that thing, ended up getting injured in the opposite numbers that were lopsided, that were disproportionately lower? And if we can hypothesize that, is there something that he could have done to prevent it? The new project, I'm very excited to bring you BaseStrengthA.I. No matter what program you do, eventually progress is going to stall. That balance of stress and recovery is going to get a little wonky. And the only way you keep going is if you personalize it to yourself. This is all fine-tuned, exhaustive decision-making that we set based on the information you put in. So to start, there's a huge questionnaire. Everything from your lifting style, your perceived weaknesses, your tolerance to work, your training history, all of these things get factored into trying to set a good starting point for you. That is put against a backdrop of my templates. So I started out thinking this is a cool gadget for people that are just highly serious and want the ultimate edge on their training, or for people that just like trying new shit, that try every new app when it comes out, or for people that just wanted to offload their decision making completely onto somebody else. All valid reasons to try this out. But as time went on, I started to see this more as something that inevitably had to be the replacement for remote coaching. This cuts that out at the knees, because every time you plug in information, you're getting direct feedback. Like, nope, this is what you're doing now. This didn't go as planned. This is plan B. Oh, this went really well. You're sandbagging it. Kick it up a notch. So all of that is taken from the beginning through each workout, through each week, through each block for as long as you run the programs. And look, if you're not a guy that's sauced out of his mind or have all the elite genetics, this is the type of stuff that you want to tighten up. So if any of that sounds interesting, go to BaseStrength.com, try it out. There's a free trial. Again, so much gratitude. Really happy to be part of this cutting edge tech. So hit the link. Thanks again. Till next time. This is Bromley. I'll see you. Could his approach have been different? Could he have insulated himself to the injury? What can you do to reinforce your pecs against tears? What can you do to make sure that you can build compression at the bottom of a lift when you need all that tension, but that tissue isn't just going to start ripping? This is a big problem. I've talked about my bicep tear. Mine was completely related to drug use. There's no doubt that drug use played a specific role here. Again, you're talking about these numbers, hitting the gas, using pharmacology to assist your training to predictably bump your numbers up and prepare for these big meets where the entire world is looking at you. That absolutely changes the dynamic. So there's a couple things we can hypothesize. We could say it's a genetic predisposition. I knew a guy, huge potential as a lifter, couldn't make it out of a strongman contest without ripping things. He tore a couple of biceps on a yoke walk. He tore his quadricep doing a stone load. And part of that was, this is an individual that got to an 850 deadlift within like a couple years of deadlifting. He was a giant dude. Could have been very good, but he was made out of Velcro. And the question is, okay, is that genetic? Is that something with like the way the protein synthesizes? To what degree could we even say it's the gear? Because you can give everybody gear, they're not going to get that strong that fast. Is it the rate of strength gain? There's so many unknowns that we have. So we have to look at what we think we can control. If we can control training and we can control something like maintenance and we can control something like PED use, that might give everybody something to sink their teeth into to make sure stuff like this doesn't happen. I don't believe that this is really just, well, you got to risk it to be a champion. He ripped his pec off, not benching, but pushing a car. Philip Moore is the guy that I cited. He, mid-6 bencher, he didn't tear it on like a 700-pound bench attempt. He was doing working sets of like 15 with like 60% and his pec left. So the accumulation of wear, the way the muscle's physically structured, how dry you are, all of these things are going to contribute, and it tends to come when you least expect it. I knew a guy who had to drop out of like a World's Strongest Man contest because he ripped his bicep moving a mattress a couple of weeks before. So I'll address both things. For training, you want to do as much as you can to insulate yourself to the task at hand. That means controlled, deliberate execution. You want things to look the same as much as possible every time you do it. You want to be like a machine, because the more ingrained you are, the more reinforced you will be, the more coordinated and efficient you will be in that pocket. If things are a little bit different each time, if there's a lot of chaos, if you're prone to push a little harder, rebound a little harder, whether in your squats or your benches, that is a great recipe for your body taking on forces that it's not prepared to handle. So that's the easy one, right? Reproducibility. But then you need to manage recovery. You need to make sure that you're not building up fatigue. If you want to be a strength athlete, lift as much weight as you fucking can. There's this paradox you have to engage with, because you need to be prepared to heavy loads, which means you need exposure. But you also need to make sure that you're adapting sufficiently so that overall you're getting stronger and stronger and not developing these weak points, not accumulating wear and tear and fatigue that's just waiting to snap at some moment where you're doing some routine task. So somebody might think, hey, the heavier you lift, the more often you'll be more insulated. But you need time to back off. You need time to recover, deloads, of course, but you also need, I think, long periods of training where you're not beating yourself around. A lot of these guys turn into superstars as much as you can be a superstar in powerlifting, and they compete. Some people have a certain amount of durability where they could do that. You have someone like Alexei Novikov in strongman who is a beast and didn't fall apart, but just accelerated. Then you had someone like Travis Ortmeyer who competed like every weekend and got injured all the fucking time. That's one of the reasons I am a big fan of periodization. I don't think it works for the reason a lot of people think it does. I think the long stretches of working in different phases is good for you. I think it's essential. And I think when you do start to get heavy, there has to be a deliberate, intentional run up that prepares you. Now, I say that to say, don't skip your fucking volume. Your volume, the practice touches, is going to be what causes the adaptations. And I think a lot of people that experience rapid strength gains, if their training is not consistently exposing them to that specific stimulus, they're not going to be as well adapted to it, even if they're physically stronger. Fast responders, that's an issue. People on PEDs, that's an issue. So that takes us to our second point, which is the PED use. And I think this is very much an example of that. I think you have somebody who does what everybody does, but again, once you get to the top, there's pressure to maintain it or to even push it farther, and usually accelerating the dosage is part of that equation. Now, this is where you can't really account for recovery, because the effect of the gear is that you're not going to be making your tendons strong enough. I think there is something with muscle tissue as well, the way it lays down. I don't think the integrity is quite the same, which again means you want to take a longer, more steady, more even path to acquire that strength and acquire that tissue. Is that bro science? Abso-fucking-lutely, but it's like the best we got right now. I don't think anybody ever suffered from taking longer to get to the end goal. I think more preparedness is always better, and I think you would want that instead of the rapid rise where the force you're putting out is greater than what systemically, even the tissue itself, can support. That's when you run into a fucking problem. So let that be a lesson, everybody. This is tortoise in the hare. You want good programs that yield consistent returns over time, and you want to take your time with those leaps. Not only will overreaching tear you up in the short term, it'll make you frustrated, it'll reduce the likelihood that you get to where you want to go. But if you do happen to see that meteoric rise, everybody's going to look at you like a fucking ticking time bomb, just waiting for something to snap. Now, I wish the best to Cailer. I mean, he was a damn good lifter. I hope he is able to make something that looks like a comeback. I mean, he's always going to be able to pull big weights, and I think he's still relatively young enough where he probably has something big in him. So we'll see what the future holds. But I'm going to be doing a lot more discussion about this type of stuff because more gear use is out in the ether. I've been open about it, but I never wanted it to be a staple here. But now there's an amount of responsibility to say this is who is justified using, this isn't who's justified using, this is all the shit you have to worry about if you're going to use. And oh, by the way, the story, the mythical legend of gear that you think it's just going to take you to the top, maybe it will, it probably won't. No matter what, if you lean on it as a crutch, this is the type of shit you got to look out for. So if you guys don't want a whole generation of young people jumping onto gear use, hopefully we're on the same team here. So let me know what you guys think. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.